Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory body of the City of Ames City Council. Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and major site development plans, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that comments be focused on new information not previously presented. I speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card and present it to the recording secretary. We ask that you come to the microphone here to speak so that all comments may be recorded. The order of the proceeding for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff. The applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Members of the audience will be invited to come forward to offer comments and questions. Once public comment is closed, city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all presentations and any comments given and come to a recommendation for city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and applicant clarification. We will move on to introductions of the commission.
Cheryl Moss.
Julie Winter.
Mike LaPetra.
Mike Clayton. Mike Sullivan.
Matthew Voss.
Approval of the agenda. We have an approve the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Agenda is approved. Approval of the minutes of August 7th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. And we have the public forum. Anybody who wishes to speak on an item that is not part of the agenda may approach the microphone at this point and speak. Okay. And with that, we will move on to the zoning text amendment to allow social service providers in the single-family conservation overlay OSFC zoning district.
Good evening. I'm Ray Anderson, of Planning and Housing. And I'll present the report tonight. The text amendment is an amendment to Article 11, which is allowable use in the single contribution overlay district. And the proposal is to allow social service providers through approval of a special use permit by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. At a meeting back in July, earlier this summer, the City Council received a request from Matt Mitchell, who's the founder and board member of the Ames Romero House, and requesting that the City Council initiate a zoning text amendment to the single-family conservation overlay district to allow the Ames Romero House, as well as other organizations or uses that would be qualify as social service providers. And so that's what's before you this evening. The City Council authorized that the staff should go ahead and bring that to the commission. And you will make a recommendation to City Council for a text amendment if you choose to move forward with this. The Single Family Conservation Overlay District, it was established back in the 1990s. That was in response to an erosion in the neighborhood's 1 and 2 family housing, primarily through multiple family conversions and other uses such as social service providers. So they adopted this overlay district, which is in addition to the base zone, which is residential medium density, and it restricts the uses for this area inside the boundaries of this overlay district, which are shown on the screen here inside that blue line. It goes from 7th Street to 11th Street, and then there's a portion that goes down to 6th Street, and then the east boundary is Duff Avenue with a few properties on the northeast corner of that district that are east of Duff, and then Grand Avenue is the west boundary. So again, it's an RM base zone with an overlay of the Single Family Conservation Overlay District. The purpose of the district is intended to, as the name would imply, conserve the existing single-family residential character of the areas identified in that district. And it's intended to protect single-family neighborhoods while guiding the transition to higher density and compatibility with surrounding uses where intensification is permitted. The OSFC is meant to help maintain the general quality and appearance of the neighborhood, promote a more cohesive look to the neighborhood, and recognize the neighborhood characteristics as a major part of the city's identity and positive image. Promote local design qualities, stabilize and improve property values, reduce conflicts between new construction and existing homes, and allow a limited amount of increased housing density. So that single-family dwellings, two-family bed and breakfast establishments, and vacation lodging, which is essentially Airbnb rental properties, and also limited number of additional units that could be constructed through multiple family housing as approved by the city council. Social service provider is the use that would be added through approval of a special provider is defined in the zoning ordinance, and it says social service provider uses are primarily engaged in providing on-site counseling, meals, or shelter beds for free or significantly below market rates. Uses that provide food on site as an accessory use are not included if the service is provided fewer than 3 days a week. For example, a church that provides free or low-cost meal once a week would not be classified as a social service provider. And currently, we allow social service providers in a limited number of residential areas of the city as a permitted use. That would include residential medium density, which happens to be the base zone here, but the overlay overrides that. And then in the RH residential high density, it's also permitted, and in the South Lincoln mixed use special purpose zoning district. It is permitted through approval of a special use permit in the FSRM zone, which is suburban residential medium density loading zone. And then social service providers are permitted only if pre-existing in residential low density and in urban core residential medium density. And these zones are most like the single family conservation overlay limitation. The land use, the Ames Plan 2040, which is the comprehensive plan for the city, shows this area as designated traditional neighborhood, which is RN-1, and then there's a small portion southwest corner here in this red area that's a core designation, which is the same as what you find downtown. Staff believes that the Ames Plan 2040 emphasizes maintaining neighborhood qualities and to balance this interest when considering proposed changes such as the proposed new use allowance. Overall, social service uses are allowed within the city and the other zoning districts I mentioned. And the consideration at hand is if the single-family conservation overlay district should become an additional area where such use could be located. There's no direct reference to this in the Ames Plan 2040, but it does emphasize maintaining neighborhood qualities and it's the interest when considering proposed changes. The Planning and Housing Department recommends that alternative 1 be approved, and that is recommend that City Council amend Article 11 and the allowable uses in the single-family conservation overlay district to allow social service providers with a special use permit. We believe that the first consideration for this request is if, in general, the use could be compatible with existing neighborhood conditions, since it applies to one specific area of the city, and the concept of a social service use is already allowed within other zoning districts. Secondly, the consideration of the special use permit takes the proposed use to a evaluation process. So just so the commission understands, if this text amendment is approved, any use, including the Romero House, would have to approval of a special use permit from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. There's certain criteria they'd have to meet for that special use permit, some general criteria and some residential criteria. And so it's very site specific. And this text amendment does not apply exclusively to the Romero House. It's any social service provider. Presently, there are 2 locations in this overlay district where there are social service providers that existed before the overlay. So they're legal non-conforming uses. So there'd be another opportunity for public input at a public hearing with the Zoning Board of Adjustment through approval of a special use permit, and they have to meet certain criteria for the board to approve that. So that adds an additional layer of regulations that they would have to meet in order to locate inside the boundaries of this overlay district. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Condition is that generally houses that are split into an apartment and family. I don't know of a lot of duplexes, so I'm curious because it's a beautiful neighborhood and I live in it. It's, you know, I'm thinking of balancing today's needs with, you know, when these houses were built with large families and stuff. So I know that they're kept up because I walk around it a lot, but is that generally, you know, they're too large for small families in general?
Well, I think a number of the 2-unit ones, it's up and down. You know, there's 1 unit on the ground floor and 1 up above.
I guess I'm not quite following what the question is. We consider a 2-family unit to be a duplex, so it could be a vertical or a horizontal structure. Units in it.
Someone split the large house into
So
an apartment and then.
So we don't call them apartments, right? So there's a difference. Once you get called an apartment, you're in a bigger building, you're 3 or more units. So there's a distinction for us. But what's important here is what was done for the last 70 years in this neighborhood of breaking up and splitting buildings has not been allowed for decades. So you have a lot of legacy structures that have been divided up into multiple units. It is no longer able to be done that way. You can only have a duplex if you build it as new construction in the area. So it's not like you can just divide up houses necessarily and create duplexes everywhere. But there is a pattern of that, you know, from older houses being broken up from the past.
Always trying to balance, you know, if the present day structure is no longer going to last as being really fitting for the use.
I guess what I don't have an opinion on that. That's not something we would probably look at in the zoning ordinance.
I guess I have one question. I was trying to find it in here, but you can help me find it faster. That we're considering a special use permit for this particular address.
I'm gonna hold you right there. We are not.
Okay, what are we doing?
We are looking at a text amendment to allow for future consideration of a special use permit.
Yes,
So
okay.
the ZBA is who would actually look at a special use permit if it was allowed to be considered.
So under this
Versus-
circumstance, then,
Changing like the definition. So we-
All right, let's
I
take
mean,
a step back. So
alternative to-
there's not an alternative. So the option is to either amend the allowed uses in this code, which is a recommendation that the P and Z can make, and city council will then make a decision to whether change the list of allowed uses. If they do, what's proposed is to allow it only via special use permit. And that special use permit would be a later application once all the decisions are made on if it's eligible or not. And the Board of Adjustment would make that decision.
that's helpful. My follow-up to that is if we recommend this text amendment to happen, it's not just this particular case that we'd be opening it up to. It would be any entity that meets the definition of a social service provider could apply for a special use permit to be considered in this district, right?
Yeah, theoretically, yes.
And then they would still have to follow all the Board of Adjustment would have to follow all of the criteria for a special use permit.
They would have to, the applicant would have to demonstrate that they meet all of the criteria. But yeah, it's not exclusive to one property. It could be many properties, many different users. So again, as Ray said, it's not just the Romero house that could take advantage of it.
Has staff received any comments from anyone who lives in this area? Obviously, this isn't, I guess, is this a public? This is not a public hearing, so that would go.
So what we did was, so I've had one conversation with an individual. We don't have anything in writing. As we indicated in the report, we reached out to the neighborhood association and said this is upcoming. Their board did discuss it and sent some questions to staff, but they did not forward an opinion or recommendation in writing that I can give to the commission.
So I see the definition of a social service provider in the packet, but are there, I guess, I have a little trouble thinking of what some of these might be other than our, so like, do we have some other examples of social service providers in the city of Ames? Or
Sure. We have 2 ISS facilities in the neighborhood already. That's a very prime example of that. We've had other, I don't know how to describe it, other groups that want to provide housing or care for people that aren't really long-term housing, so more of a shelter kind of environment. They have not been allowed to go here because social service providers for shelters aren't permitted. Access would be an example of an organization that provides temporary shelter for abuse victims. That's a social service provider. There's other a different umbrella, or under the same umbrella, provide different kinds of services. So it's pretty broad once you get into that category. And that's why the special use permit is essential, because you can't specify exactly what the service is. Well, you can, but you're writing a very narrow definition of that.
Low-income housing facilities that are somewhat charity-based, basically.
I'm going to say no because that's too vague of a description. So if you provide housing, you're housing. If you shelter people, which means they're not their permanent address, that's when you fall into a category of being a social service provider. So low income doesn't have an element to it. We don't regulate housing on income levels. So if you want to provide housing for low income individuals and they're going to live there as their regular address, that's just housing. If it is not their regular address, whether they're have low income or not, again, that's probably too big for me to. Story County Housing. Well, the Story County Housing Trust, they operate some long-term housing opportunities. They are not a shelter. There are also different uses that provide temporary shelter, which is a social service right. So what matters to us in the city under zoning, our definition of a home, a household living use, is if the average stay is for 60 days or more. Anything under 60 days is considered transient and tends to fall into that category of sheltering people because it's not an established permanent address. So that's kind of the dividing line for us. So we don't really look at income levels in response to any of those issues. It's really the length of stay. Is there staff? Like, there's other elements to it, but for the most part, it's whether someone is living there for an extended period of time, meaning a minimum of 60 days on average.
So like the bridge home being one element of, I mean, they're not, but the transitional housing that they provide that tends to be a year or two would fit under, wouldn't fit under.
Right. So Bridge offers a couple of different services. If it's their transitional living apartments, those are considered permanent addresses for those individuals because they're staying longer. That's just housing. If it's sheltering, that is not household living. That's a social service. So like they're in the South, most of their properties in that South Lincoln mixed use district. They have a variety of services. That district allows for consideration of social service providers or household living.
Can we go back to that zoning map to where you had the?
Yeah.
Okay, so it said right now, social service providers are not allowed in the area within blue. Are they allowed outside of the blue area? I can't remember. It's
You see it. Most of it's UCRM, so no, you would have to go south of this neighborhood to get into zoning districts where it might be possible. So UCRM is another version of residential zoning that has very narrow allowed uses. It's slightly more restrictive for uses, the OSFC, but it doesn't have the same design requirements as the OSFC. So they're both very restricted on use. OSFC has the extra design requirements.
I think I saw in staff packet that the 2040 plan did describe this area as generally single family. Again, it's the two YSS facilities you're talking about, but there's not too much else non-single family in there.
I would describe it this way. So RN1, so our comp plan has a very unique way of categorizing neighborhoods through a combination of buildings, subdivision patterns, and kind of the general character and use of the area. So in this, because it was one of those original platted neighbor subdivisions of the city, obviously it has a historically traditional gridded street system with alleys. So that was a big factor. Does not mean single family exclusively. It just means the setup of the neighborhood is based on that kind of physical dimension with the combination of uses. So yes, there are a lot of single family here. But the reason the overlay was created because there wasn't an erosion of that single family pattern with a lot of changeover to multifamily buildings in the 80s and early 90s. And that's when this overlay was put in to stop those conversions of single family homes or even to demolish them and replace them with something else. So there's quite a mix. But we don't read into traditional to being single family only versus a lot of comp plans will say single family low residential, single family medium. We didn't do that. That's not how our comp plan structures it.
Any other questions for staff? Is the applicant here? Would the applicant like to come forward and make a statement?
Good
Hi.
evening.
Have you filled out the card? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
Oh,
interrupt.
need a card? You got
Oh,
it.
you've got it. Okay.
Hello, good evening. My name is David Thielen. I'm the executive director of the Romero House and Ames. I'd like to thank the commission, Ray, for your presentation on our text amendment. Very good questions. I was going to go into a whole blurb of what we do, but I think the questions are really important to address. Our first house, the house that we have currently, is that we call the Yellow House at 709 Clark, just north of Fairway. We've been in existence since 2020, and we serve the community that is in need of a meal, a shower, laundry, a napping room, really a reprieve to get off their feet for 2 to 3 hours a day. We do not house any of our residents or guests. They only come between 1 to 4 p.m. So I think it's very important to note that. Saturdays we're closed, and then Sundays we have a hospitality from 10:30 to 4. Typically, we see anywhere from 15 to 30 guests per day. It usually varies. Sundays are a little bit busier, but it's typically the same people. So it's people that are in need. Some of them are from the Bridge Home that just need a meal. Sometimes the Bridge Home says you have to leave at 8:30 in the morning. You have nowhere to go. So from 1 to 4, we house them. We have fellowship. We listen to their stories. We hear them. And we have a lot of volunteers in this community that support the mission, a lot of donors. We have a resident, a live-in, Taylor, who's here with me. Our plan is to maintain the Yellow House at 709 Clark and turn that into a residence for our live-ins. Our live-ins are employees of the organization. So they are the backbone of what we do. They coordinate the volunteering, the food, everything that we do. So eventually, if we get approved for this, we'll maintain the Yellow House, 709 Clark, and that will be live-ins to live in. There'll be 4 that will live in the house. If you've noticed, if you've gone by the property, our backyard is professionally landscaped. The inside is beautifully remodeled. We put a lot of care into the homes. And Cheryl, you mentioned, the history and the beauty of that neighborhood. We want to maintain that. So we're not here to have guests come in and sleep overnight, stay for a week, stay for a month, 1 to 4 in the afternoon. If we are approved and we get what we call the Orange House, which is 702 Clark, which is just north of Fairway, the Orange House. It's a very historical old house. And we have plans to remodel the inside to its splendor of the 1890s, 1900s. And again, professionally landscape the backyard and the front yard to make it look beautiful for the neighborhood. We will also follow the city's recommendation on ADA compliance, which is very important to us and to the city. So we'll have ramps and we'll have access for the bathrooms, the showers for ADA. So we've always been a huge advocate of city code, following the guidelines of the city. If they come to us and say, hey, we need a tree trimmed down, like today, we took it down. We do things immediately based on what the city asks us to do. So we're asking for the consideration of this text amendment to allow us to continue to serve the community in a very positive manner. We got a letter from one of the guests the other day that said, you don't know how much the Romero House does for us, just to listen to us and to have a meal and to lay down and have laundry done. It means a lot to these people. They need help. So I'll open it up for any questions you may have.
No questions?
Thank you.
Would any member of the audience like to come forward and offer comments?
Hi, thanks for letting me speak with you tonight. My name is Kate Gregory. I live at 803 Kellogg, 3 blocks north of the post office. When I moved to Ames 9 years ago, one of the reasons I chose that neighborhood was I liked the mixed use. I liked the diversity of housing. I liked the diversity of the people. I live right across from a YSS house. I've always really liked being their neighbor. They're a great neighbor. and I like that they bring, I think, something rich to the community. When I bought that house in 2015, I thought that there were only two community service providers in the area, the YSS house I live across from and the one that's across from Fairway. Actually, today, there are, to the best of my knowledge, 5 what I consider social service providers. There are the 2 YSS houses. There's the existing Romero house. There's a house, I don't really want to give the location of, but I know that the city knows because they told me about it, which provides care for, I think, abused people. And then there's a house that was bought down the street from me on Kellogg between 7th and 8th. It was bought by Loris Olson, and it's going to be used for unhoused women. I think that these kinds of facilities in our community are great. I think that it's my responsibility and my community's responsibility to take care of this sector of our community. But this neighborhood has typically 5 lots per each side of the block. So in the 6-block area around my house, between Kellogg and Clark and 7th and 9th, there will be a Romero house. If this overlay is approved, the Romero house proceeds with their plans, there'll be 6 of 60 properties converted from or used instead of for the single family to family vacation to social services. These are just the ones I know of. Obviously, since there are some I didn't know of and aren't mentioned in your report, there are probably others out there. I appreciate that our city needs to solve our social services problem. And I strongly endorse the city coming up with a plan that does this, and I'm going to participate in that. But I think 10% of a 6-block area is a lot. It changes the nature of that community. I know it because I live there. And when I talk to my neighbors, they talk about not wanting to walk to Fairway anymore. When I talk to the Fairway cashiers and they just unprodded say that they don't walk to work anymore because the tone of the neighborhood has changed. When I go to the library and I see what happens at the library, when I talk to my friends who have kids that they don't allow to go to the library unsupervised anymore, I know that the tone of my neighborhood has changed. And I think it's because of the density of purpose that has been allowed to happen in my community. And so if it were my decision, I wouldn't approve this, but it's your decision and it's the council's decision. So I would just ask you, as you consider this, to think about a couple of things. One, get the data. Get the data on what is happening in this community, not just the 2 YSS houses and the Romero house. Get the data on what's really going on, because I think data is important. And I think you should get the data and you should analyze the data, have the city analyze the data and use it. In 2021, 2024, that should be happening. Second, I would say talk to the community. When Kellogg Avenue got new water lines a couple of years ago, everybody in my community got a letter from the city and they had a little meeting about it. And a couple of months ago, when I was told that now they're going to do the same with 8th, same thing. We all got a letter and now, we've had meetings about it. I think that when the city is considering these kinds of things, we ought to send a letter. It's true and it's bad on my Old Town board, and I'm on board, that when the email came to us, the guy who was supposed to receive emails didn't see it. And that the other address that we sent to is defunct. And that's on us as the board, and we'll fix that. But I think that if the city can send around letters for water line replacements and only, have a 3-month impact on it, it can also send letters around for changes to our zoning like this. I think that would be appropriate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, Julie Cruz, 817 Kellogg Avenue. I will not speak as eloquently as Kate. My brain is spaghetti, so bear with me. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Kate said. On my block alone, I've been in my house for 15 years. I have 3 small children. On just my block face, I live across the street from a church, a triplex, one that is at least 4 units, maybe more, and a YSS property, and single family owner occupied. So I'm not afraid of a mix of uses. I appreciate it. That's why I chose to live in this neighborhood. And I think many of us appreciate that character about the neighborhood that we do live in. And so it's not about the Romero house, it's about the social service use in general. And I would ask that you just pause the conversation and maybe to the next meeting or a couple meetings and have a conversation and get data. And I'd ask you that for a couple of reasons. One, there's clearly confusion amongst the commission of what you're being asked to approve based on your questions to staff tonight. You're not even sure what's being approved. Secondly, the concentration. There are social service providers in the neighborhood that aren't marked. Romero has I believe they have a sign in front of their house. The YSS properties don't. Other properties don't. If you are a female living in a sheltered home, escaping abuse, you don't want a sign in front of that property. And I completely understand that. So I think we just need to pause and think about, does the special use criteria, does that need to be a list that's geared specifically towards social service providers as well? Because I am not speaking for the zoning commission. I'm on the zoning board of adjustment here in Ames. We've written staff reports. Those criteria are for any use that needs a special use permit. Fits all. Writing those staff reports and reading those staff reports to others, sometimes the answers don't really fit because it doesn't apply. And one social service provider can operate differently than another. And so I just think that it needs to be a bigger conversation. And obviously the city feels that way because the city has chosen to put out an RFP to hire a professional consultant to help us just have this discussion on the unhoused population. I would say that safety has become a concern. I run in the morning. I have 3 small children. I no longer let my children walk to the library or downtown by themselves. I know I can't keep them in a bubble. They have watches and phones that have GPS, but they love to go to the library and dog-eared books, and they're not allowed to do that without an adult. We now have people that are sleeping in Douglas, Town Pocket Park. We have people that are sleeping and staying during the day on the Elks property of the front, lawn of the Elks, in front of the library at Banshell Park. So clearly there is a need, and I am too willing to be a part of that conversation. But it's impacting our neighborhood in a greater, there's a greater impact on our neighborhood than I think people realize. And I think people are not having the chance to have the conversation about. As far as notice, yes, the city sent a letter to the neighborhood board, but it's a neighborhood board. They meet once a month or once every month. By the time they get the notice, they have to have time to notify residents and have a discussion about it and get an opinion. I don't know if the time was permitted for that to happen. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We have a neighborhood picnic coming up in a couple of weeks. I don't know. We have a newsletter, but again, that already came out. So getting that into the printing of that was impossible. Sorry, I'm getting long-winded and I didn't mean to. But I just think that, yeah, I'm just asking to pause for data, like Kate said, and have a larger conversation about the use and what that impact might be on. I mean, again, it's not the Romero house specifically. In fact, their fence is beautiful. And I mean, they're already on the property in the orange house. They're already here. It looks nice. I can't say they're not a bad neighbor. I don't live that close to them, and it doesn't appear that they're bad neighbors. So again, it's just more of the social service provider use in general. And I think you can make the argument too about affordable housing. If everybody comes in and, you know, makes whatever changes to the interior of these houses to suit their social service provider needs, how is a single family or somebody who needs affordable housing going to come in and convert that back? You could debate that this is one of the last affordable neighborhoods in the city as well. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. No one else? Public comment is closed. Does the city have any concluding remarks?
I don't think so. I can probably clarify one thing because maybe the commission's not aware of it. So the reference to the RFP for unhoused people. So the city council is looking at, in partnership with Story County, I think some others, hire a consultant to evaluate some information about homelessness issues in the city. And it's a broad review. It's not about just downtown or anything like that. It's looking at a number of issues. It has yet to be, they've provided funding for, but it has not yet been initiated. So if you're wondering what those comments are about, they're from in response to that initial effort by City Council to look at that issue.
I'm just going back to my not very clearly stated comments or questions earlier about, I think there's probably a reason that this area has, some of these facilities. And I think it has to do with the old traditional houses that are having to shift use because, we don't have 8 or 10 people living in a house anymore, or 6 or 8. I know that, there's wonderful houses but I've seen next door to me, and doesn't meet the social services criteria, but an attempt to rent out the place, and it eventually became a low income facility. And I just wonder if there are some natural things that are going to happen with these old traditional houses as society adjusts to new size families. So it kind of goes both ways. And I also wanted to comment on, I do a lot of walking to Fairway and to and to the library. And I acknowledge that I raised my children at a homeless shelter. So you kind of see how but the library is one of the big draws, and I wouldn't want to change that. I want the library open to everyone. And I remember a time when I was excluded from using a library because I wasn't a permanent resident of a different library. But since I've moved to Ames, I first lived very close to the public library, and I wondered, wow, why are all these farmers doing in here in the middle of the day? And I realized that they were homeless people later, but many years later. So that has always been a factor in this area. And like I said, I wouldn't want to change that.
Right. So we're not talking about anything outside of the blue line. So city facilities are not part of the conversation at all. So I just want to keep us focused on the OSFC neighborhood and the impacts within that neighborhood rather than the facilities outside of it. Obviously, from the neighborhood comment, there's influences within and adjacent to the neighborhood that they're concerned about, but we're really not talking about city facilities at all.
I have a couple of questions, I guess, after discussion, but are there other zoning districts or other parts of the city where similar providers are housed or are located? Where are those, I guess? But probably know some of them, I guess, but are there any areas that have more than others, or some examples maybe?
The South Lincoln mixed use, which is really 3rd Street, Washington, Kellogg, that area, South 3rd Street, South 4th Street, that area, that zoning district is one of the most permissible zoning districts in the city. So that's where a number of bridge home facilities are. There's some other uses in that area too. Otherwise, even though there's a few zones that allow it, those zones are not common in the city. So you don't really have a large spread of this type of use to all corners of the city. So even though it's conceivable to locate in other places, there aren't really that many across the city. There's a few, but it's not common to see outside of it. So churches are considered something else. I'm kind of excluding churches from the conversation. So a true nonprofit standalone social service provider, they might have office. So another thing we didn't even bring up, Good Neighbor has an office on Clark, right? Food at First is within a church. It's in the Epcot area as well, but it's within a church, so we don't see it the same as these things. So there are other things in the neighborhood. So it's kind of.
How about Good Neighbor? Is it
Good Neighbor is on, yeah, they're on Clark. But it's more of an office use. So it's kind of like how do you, so those nonprofits, they can be viewed as providing the service on site. It can be more of an office environment. But those uses that actually provide services, there's not too many that are in residential areas. South Lincoln mixed use would be a big exception to that.
Yeah. So, yeah, to me, I think the thing, you know, if not here, where like there's obviously for this, and I understand the concerns of the neighborhood neighbors. My concern that balancing that with okay, there is this need. Where can these social service providers locate? So that's kind of the question I'm interested in getting at. But
So we do list that in the report. Ray read that off earlier. I think we say it's allowed within highway oriented commercial, which is one of the most common commercial zones in the city. Downtown is allowed. So downtown service center south of this neighborhood allows it. Campus Town allows it. The South Lincoln mixed use allows it. And then FSRM is a residential zone, but it's more on the periphery of the city. And there's not a lot of it. It's a newer zoning district on the perimeter of the city. So for the most part, they're geared towards commercial areas. South Lincoln's a hybrid. And then again, you have legacy uses here. And then RH is high density residential. It's a very common zone, and it also allows for that use by special use permit. Okay. So there are a number of properties across the city that could house the use, but they're definitely geared towards either commercial or high density areas. And that's where the question comes here. It's a transitional zone. It has a medium density designation, but the city stepped in with the single family overlay and said, hey, this is a little bit different here. We want to be more cognizant of the use mixes and how it's allowed. So that's why it's a text amendment consideration.
Okay. So can I ask, I have two other questions, I guess, for the applicant and for you. And I guess my one question I have, so
we got to be more, we don't really have engagement back and forth.
oh, okay.
That I think it's up to the chair's discretion. It can be question and answer back. So if you want to let someone come back up and speak, it's up to the chair to do that.
Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, I guess just a question I have after this back and forth is so I guess what makes you want to develop this in the area you are now versus some of those other zoning districts that Kelly just mentioned.
Right. And
if you could speak to that a little bit.
absolutely. So the distinction to make again is that we're not developing two homes. We'll have one home. We have one now. If approved, we'll have one in the Orange House. The area, as explained, is a library. We have a lot of people that come to us for that 3-hour reprieve. So we're here to service them. So it's a perfect location for that. They have transportation areas. So we service them. We're very, very careful about the grounds. If you notice our hospitality between 1 to 4, you don't see many people at all outside. So it's the integrity of the neighborhood is mentioned. We agree. We want to keep that. If you look at the Romero House today, it's public in the proximity of where the people are, and the services again provide them what they need. We're not going from 1 to 2. We're going from 1 to 1. Make that distinction. And again, if we get the Orange House, it needs some work. It needs some work on the outside to follow the code of the historical district. But it needs a lot of work on the inside, and we're willing to put the money into it to make that happen. Again, no sleeping overnight. We monitor the yards. We monitor the grounds. We have volunteers from the community, the business community, and the residential community that volunteer during those hours to make sure it's clean and working. But we want to keep the beauty of the neighborhood. There's a balance between the beauty of the neighborhood and the safety. We haven't had any issues with safety. I appreciate the comments about the grounds and how we keep everything clean. The fencing, the landscape, the home itself. We have signage to make sure that everybody knows where we are. The question is the proximity of where the population is today. Now, what was mentioned on South 4th, South 3rd, people are living there overnight for a month or longer. We don't allow that. We're just a hospitality 3-hour reprieve for the people that are there. They're not leaving. So somebody has to take care of them. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. And then, so then the other decided whether to allow, but I guess pause and like more research, I guess, to that question. What would be, what are the additional facts that you think are needed, or information that's needed in order to come to the best decision, I guess, that we don't have information on right now?
No, that's a good question. I think that's fair. I would argue one reason for the pause and the concentration discussion is their use, the way they operate. They are, again, it's not Romero House, and it's not that I don't want these services to be provided, but the way they are operating, because they don't sleep there, they're increasing the transient nature of our neighborhood, operating just to come and go, to do your laundry, to eat for 3-4 hours on this day or whatnot. That's increasing that transient. We can look at those HOC, those other zoning districts. Southeast corner of Duff and Lincoln Way. All those homes over there are zoned HOC, but they're all residential homes. There's like 4 blocks of houses, but they're all ROs. I don't know what the updated comp plan says for that area, but I mean, there's some houses right there that it's an allowed use. Again, and just having that conversation of maybe it needs its own separate criteria as a unique use in that use permit for that special use criteria. So that would just be my additional thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You had mentioned that you had reached out to the neighborhood association, but apparently it had gone to the wrong address, went to an old address or whatever. Would it make sense to go back and allow them a little bit of time to take a look? Because I think if they looked at what the requirements are for a permit, that would give them some relief as far as their concerns for what is going to be allowed in their neighborhood. Would it make sense to go back and do that again and make sure that the right person gets it this time, which, wasn't your fault in the first place, but.
I wonder if that kind of be taken up if it moves forward at the next.
Yes, or maybe
They would have
looking at it
an
between now and when
opportunity
the
to
council
present it
takes a look at it. Yes,
if it's, because we're only advisory.
right.
So
And we're only considering whether special use permits should be allowed, not any specific permit.
In my own opinion, they should be allowed, but it needs to be done in a way that everybody's comfortable with. And between now and when the council takes this up, then that would allow the neighborhood to take another look at it and take a detailed look at the requirements and be able to ask some questions in the meantime if they feel necessary.
So neighborhood associations, their boards, like they're an instrument of communication, but at the same time, they have no responsibility per se about getting the word out to 150 people in a neighborhood. We hope that they do that. They strive to do that at times. So as Kate said, their board eventually had the message, discussed it, but they didn't really have time to message out to anybody else when they did discuss it a week or so ago. So I want to caution you to think that reaching out to the board alone is great public input. I think you heard the comment of what else could be done. We can look at that on the way to city council and see what we can do. And it's not normally required. It's not expected, but maybe it's a unique situation where we can do that as the planning division. The commission could recommend doing that. Your choices are kind of this. Let's say you can delay action. That's always an option. If you want more information, you can request that from staff. You can't exactly direct us to go do an outreach effort. That's kind of beyond scope of the commission. We may take that on ourselves just as the department. You can take action tonight. You could defer it and ask for specific information for at least, you can wait up to 30 days to do that. That's our allowance in the code, is if the commission does not want to take action and it's a direct request, delay for 30 days to get more information. I think that the comments you've heard so far are maybe the special use permit criteria aren't perfect, and I work with them. I can understand that. So there's a conversation to be had. Is it just a special use permit with this list? Is it allowed at all? Is there a different set of things that should be discussed and maybe be applicable to a particular type of use? Are there particular issues that should be addressed differently? Those are things that you can all talk about and you can make recommendations about. It doesn't have to be 100% either what's on the books now or nothing at all. You can discuss that. And maybe the commission loves the current standards and you're all fine with that and you want to recommend that. That's also possible. So that's kind of where you're at tonight to kind of, I guess, push you towards discussion at this point is, do you want to take action? If so, you have a lot of options in terms of recommendations you can make.
In terms of public outreach, I know it's mentioned in here, but I can't exactly find it. For the special use permit, there is notification and outreach to neighbors, right? What exactly does that entail?
So it's a 200-foot mailed notice and a posting of a sign on a property.
I guess the concern that I have as we consider this is the criteria for special use permit. I mean, they very much are subjective. I'm even reading a couple of the highlights I did was be harmonious with and in accordance with the general principles and proposals of the comp plan, not be hazardous or disturbing. What would that mean? Not create excessively higher levels of traffic. Well, it could be challenging in some ways to try to, how does one approve this even on the ZBA to be able to, I don't know, this could be opening up a can of worms, but I agree that the services are needed there and I appreciate everything that's happening, but I've lived in that neighborhood for 3 years of my life and it's been some time since I've lived there, but I definitely want to hear from people who live there now to hear how it's changed, and I guess I respect that because I don't want to make a change that's going to really negatively impact somewhere. Just general comment.
So do we have a motion?
I move that we recommend that City Council amend Article 11 and the allowable uses in the OSFC to allow social service providers permit.
I second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All in favor, say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes.
So this item will go to City Council. I'm not going to assign a date to it yet because we'll evaluate what notice options are available, but it could be as early as September 27th for those of you that are in the audience. I'm sorry, September 24th. That's a Tuesday.
Okay.
And we have item 7, a major site development plan for 1205 and 1399 South Dayton Avenue for soil extraction and enlargement of an existing pond within the environmentally sensitive overlay.
All right, good evening. I'm Justin Moore. I'm the planner for this application. So this is a major site development plan, probably one that you wouldn't normally see on a typical basis. The application in front of you this evening is to consider the expansion of a pond that you see here. This is at 1205 and 1399 South Dayton. And this is actually just west of the Tyson store off of South Dayton. So this is on a property that has quite a bit of land on it. It's an agriculturally zoned property. There's a single-family home with outbuildings located on it, and the reasoning for the major site plan is discovered last fall that the pond that you see there on screen had been enlarged. And the area of enlargement was this approximate area right in here that's shaded in yellow. Then there was also some work done on the banks and of course adjacent to the pond with construction of a trail that you can see outlined there, and then some fill that was shifted or introduced here to connect what was formerly just kind of a round island to the shore, to the mainland there. So two reasons for this are this location is in the environmentally sensitive overlay, which is overlaid on the floodway in the regulatory floodplain, special flood hazard area. So there's two areas in the floodplain. There's the area you can build, which is the fringe, the floodplain fringe, and then there's the area that's fairly highly restricted, which is the floodway, and that's where the vast majority of the pond's located. And so as a result of that work, there are two requirements that kick in, or two things that need to be reviewed. The first is the OE standards, which in this situation, when this occurs, require a major site development plan. They also require an environmental assessment. And that environmental assessment is to review whether any environmental resources were damaged or removed, and then also whether any wetland was adversely affected, and overall whether there was any natural habitat that was adversely affected as well. So the floodplain development side of it reviews this to ensure that there was no rise or no obstruction created in the floodway. And then the environmental assessment and major site development plan portion of it under Article 11 looks at that environmental assessment report and whether any of the major site development plan standards were or were not met. So the activity included, again, what you see there. We have went ahead and reached out to the owner and the owner's engineer and taken a look at this here in the past several months since late last fall. And so I'll just pull this up on screen. That is another view of the pond there just to the south and west of the single family home. We did have the applicant's engineer provide us with this, which was pretty key in going back after the fact and investigating, what actually occurred as far as fill that was introduced or removed, and that's the cut and fill calculation that you see there. Typically, and I think we mentioned this in the report, we would see this application and these reviews ahead of doing the work. So what we were doing was going back and working with their engineer to account for the work that had been done, and then reviewing the standards from there. So this is one of the things that we asked for. We did review this, and we also did show this to the DNR. We did conclude that there was no rise created. As a result, the engineers also submitted a signed certified no rise certificate with floodplain development permit. The Army Corps of Engineers has taken review of this, and they just finished up their review about a month ago. We did get a letter from them, and they did state that this was not jurisdictional for them, so there was no review required on their part. There was a note in the environmental assessment report. The environmental assessment report was found that there was no adverse impact on any of the criteria that are looked at for that report. They did note that there was a small area of wetland. It was down here to kind of where I've got the mouse there to the southwest. I think that was just slightly impacted. It was less than 1/10 of an acre. The report concluded, though, that it did not cause any adverse impact to the wetland cell that was there. Staff, myself, I went out and walked the site, so I did get to walk around the site and take a physical look at everything that had been done. And again, we have looked at the explanations the engineer sent, and we do find that there was no rise and there was no adverse impact to the environmental resources here. We did advise the owner, obviously, to seek permits for any other work of this nature in the future. But again, the enlargement of the detention pond did not create any sort of an adverse impact here from the materials that we were provided and from what we observed on site. So with that, I will just follow up and say we did answer, of course, the criteria for findings in the major site development plan. Some of those are not triggered here. Again, this is not a building or a commercial building or an industry or multiple buildings, but we still have to review for them. And there were a few that did apply, but we found pretty conclusively that all of those were met or did not apply as they weren't affected by this sort of project. So I can take any questions at this point.
Is there a charge for permits?
As far as the permit fee,
Yeah.
we do have a permit fee for any sort of permit, major minor site development plan, floodplain permit, that sort of thing. So those fees have been paid in this case. Yeah.
Any other questions? Is the applicant here?
Good evening. Scott Renault with Renault Engineering, representing Dave Wheelock, the property owner. Dave's trusted me with taking care of this issue. So really what he was doing here was kind of what he thought was maintenance plus the trail. The excavation actually went to the Grand Avenue extension. Then I think there was some swapping of some repair work as part of that. So he wasn't aware he needed a permit because he already had a hole, so he was just working on the same hole that he already had. So anyway, that's why we're here. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. We have a motion?
I can make a motion that we approve alternative 1. The Planning and Zoning Commission can recommend that the City Council approve the major site development plan for 1205 South Dayton Avenue by concluding that the plan meets the standards of the zoning ordinance.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, any commission comments? Other than the usual question, we're going to be meeting in 2 weeks.
Highly likely we have a project.
Any other comments, questions for the?
I'll just make a remark, if that's all right. Yeah, comment. So I don't even know where to start. Okay, so downtown had requested that we partner with the Ames Main Street organization to do a downtown plan. So we did, as the city, offer some funding to that project, and it has been kicked off. So you may start to hear information or conversations or input opportunities about a downtown plan for downtown Ames. But it is not operated by the city. We are not doing the plan itself. We're partners in it. So I just wanted to let you know that if you start to hear about that, you wonder, well, I haven't heard about it. Planning staff hasn't said anything about it. You will not actually formally approve it as the commission. It's going to be a plan that's done with Ames Main Street. City Council will eventually, because the funding partner, look at it. But it may or may not ever be adopted as a particular city plan. So I want to make sure you understood that. I think the council's having a workshop on the 17th with the consultant to just kind of outline city goals or interests for the area. And public input hasn't really been received yet on different ideas or concepts that should be coming here this fall. So I just want to make sure you know what's happening. It's kind
Thank you. And I guess the meeting is adjourned.